So in chapter 5, we discovered that Rav Kook said there's some big challenges coming, and there is a natural way of the human being to keep going, to keep searching, to keep digging, to find the depth in both worldly matters and spiritual matters. What you described as quantum spirituality, quantum wisdom.
Quantum wisdom.
So where does he go now in chapter 6, and what's it called?
So chapter 6 is called 𝗕'𝗵𝗿𝗂𝗵. In Judaism, there's basically two different avenues of mystery, of sodiut, and this is found in the Talmud. This is actually codified in Jewish law because of certain restrictions on publicly discussing these matters without having proper, making sure that the people who are sitting in on the discussions are not going to be led to mistaken understanding. Similarly, you wouldn't want someone who hasn't taken a basic physics class taking some advanced, class that's going to lead them astray from some of the basic underpinnings of the discipline. So in Judaism, there's something called 𝗕'𝗵𝗽𝗁, which more or less describes. It's a big discussion of what it means exactly. There's pages and pages on it, but 𝗕'𝗵𝗽𝗁 more or less means the secrets of the physical world, physics, chemistry, before we even had language to describe some of these things. This is called 𝗕'𝗵𝗽𝗁, which literally means the work of creation, on a certain level of Bereshis, meaning the creation story. And on the other hand, you have 𝗕'𝗵𝗃𝗵, which is more associated with Kabbalah or mysticism. Interestingly, Rav Kook felt that the Torah itself, the revealed aspects of Torah, were sort of dependent on understanding both of these disciplines, understanding science and understanding mysticism. Rav Kook one time said, "Im ein kemach, ein Torah." If there is no flour, that's a statement from the Talmud. If there is no, from 𝗕'𝗵𝗃𝗵, if there is no flour, there is no Torah. If there's no flour, there can't be Torah. You have to be able to eat in order to be able to study, in the simple interpretation. So Rav Kook homiletically explained the word kemach as being an acronym for Kabbalah. That's the K of kemach. Mem is for Mada, which means science. And the ches of kemach is Chasidut, is Chasidus. So Rav Kook said, if you don't have these things, it's not going to be possible to properly understand Torah. You need to understand science. You need to understand metaphysics or Kabbalah, or how Hashem interfaces with a finite world. And you need to understand how that relates to you personally, which is what Chassidus is. How do I take these kind of spiritual principles and apply them to my specific life? So Rav Kook says, 𝗕'𝗵𝗽𝗁 and 𝗕'𝗵𝗃𝗵 work in tandem with each other. Because if both of these are pieces of the puzzle of understanding Torah, it can't be that one of them runs ahead of the other one and leaves the other one behind. And so this is a very painful piece, because Rav Kook in chapter 6 here basically looks at the Jewish community and says, how can it be that our books that we're looking to for theological inspiration are from the 1400s, the 1200s, the 1100s?
Meaning their understanding of the world then.
It's not an obvious critique, right? Because I think that's what you're getting at. Because the difference between revelation and a received tradition is something that, of course, you look backwards because you're receiving something from your ancestors, as opposed to science, which by definition is, burying the last guy's theory so that my theory will, I understand the world better now on the shoulders of his theory, hopefully, and I'm not really burying him. But so it's not intuitive, but I think what you're pointing out is that the only way that this is going to work is if we update the language.
I think what I'm hearing is update the application of worldly discoveries with the spirituality. You can't be a 14th century Jew in the 21st century. I mean, you can, but the problem is that there's a catch up. There's a gap.
Right. If we acknowledge that we're being called to a secret in understanding the physical world and a secret in understanding the metaphysics of how Hashem interfaces with the world, then by definition, the science today is not good. But it's better than the alchemy that we were using, a few hundred years ago. And so the language of alchemy is just not going to suffice which is being used. You look in older books, you look in the 1000s, 1100s, and they're talking about, the four humors and, black bile and yellow bile and all these things. And they're talking about things that don't resonate with us anymore. And so Rav Kook is saying that in the same way that the language, which is being used to describe physical reality, is being updated, we're way behind in terms of kind of utilizing that language and also being more full-throated in things that maybe we didn't speak about so openly, because works that originally were mystical works were they were before their time. They weren't appropriate to be kind of speaking about openly. But now that we have the language to speak about these paradoxes, and we have the language to speak about some of these things that would have rang as esoteric before, now they're so simple to understand because this is the science of the day. And sort of Kook is very disappointed with the fact that we're still the parable that I always give is when a 3-year-old reaches that age of beginning to be educated in Torah and mitzvos in the Jewish community. So for boys, they give them a haircut, they put on tzitzis. And, usually they'll put like a cartoon character on the tzitzis. And as the kid gets older, the tzitzis, they love those fringes, the 4-corner garment, but they need to update with like a new pair. And if they don't, if they're 40 years old and they're still wearing the Thomas the Tank Engine or, Fireman Sam, tzitzis, it's going to choke them around the neck. And so for Rav Kook, the same thing is true with ideas. If you're still holding on to the same language and the same way of presenting an idea, which is so profound, but you're giving it with such, you're choking the idea, and allowing it to breathe means incorporating this new 𝗦𝗢𝗵𝗽𝗁 material, which is being given to the world as well, so that 𝗦𝗢𝗵𝗽 and 𝗦𝗢𝗵𝗃𝗵, which largely is Mada and Kabbalah,
are in sync
with each other. And then you add in Chassidus, which means applying it to psychology and to the human condition and how we operate in the world. And then Torah can flourish because of ein kemach, ein Torah.
Did he feel the Jewish community at the time were not approaching it with this attitude?
So he wasn't waiting. He decided he's going to open his own yeshiva. Rav Kook opened the central, world yeshiva, which is now called Merkaz Harav, after Rav Kook, Harav being Rabbi Kook. But at the time it was called the Yeshiva Merkazi Olami, that's what it's called, the central yeshiva of the world. And there he started to implement, in terms of what people were studying. He reintroduced the study of Maharal. He reintroduced the study of certain basic texts of Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy that were being ignored, and attempted to create a language with his own writing that would synthesize all of those ideas and give it to the world in an updated language with more poetry and more depth and more potency than was being given at the time. And he, at the same time, didn't just rest on that, but was writing letters to all the leaders of the time saying, pick up the pace, we got to do something.
Was there ever a time then, historically, where the Jewish community, broadly speaking, was engaging in its study of Torah in this manner? Meaning, it sounds like as the centuries rolled on, post the destruction of the temple, and maybe it was happening even at the time, there wasn't this linking between Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkava.
Yeah.
Was he coming out with something so unique, or was it unique to the generation that he found himself in?
So interestingly, by the Sephardim, there was less of a split between Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkava. The study of worldly wisdom, the Rambam as an example, but the study of worldly wisdom, the Ramban as well was a doctor, and this study of the depth of, less so with the Rambam, but with the Ramban for sure, and with the Chida and the Ben Ish Chai and many of the other Chachamim of Sfard, there was no, the Ben Ish Chai is a good example, Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. He wrote a book according to the Parshiot HaShavua, every week a different Torah portion, where he would explain the various halachos that relate to, he would pick one or two things related to the Parsha maybe, and he would give a long list. Every single piece begins with a deep and esoteric Kabbalistic tract into the ideas that he's talking about, and then he launches into the practical law. But he didn't see those as two different domains. It's in the same book. Whereas, in Ashkenaz, for good reason, there was several false messiahs, and maybe they were hit more strongly with the wave of Christianity that, again, some of that happened in obviously in Spain, the Crusades, but there was a different, the air was different in Ashkenaz in Germany, where there was more of a arm's length kept between Kabbalistic doctrine and Jewish law. Part of it was people were just trying to survive. Like, what do I do now? And I couldn't,
get into these.
Yeah, I didn't have the time to sit and think about these things. And the other thing was we got burned once or twice with 𝗕'𝗿𝗄𝗏 and with the Frankists and other things that kind of gave us pause before we dove right in. And Rav Kook said, that's great, but now we're in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, now we're in Eretz Yisrael, and the time has come to kind of open up and do this the right way, finally.